Okay, let's run.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
It's a quest. It's a quest for fun.
Well, The Rock says, why don't we just cut right to the chase?
Okay, now he wants to get together. Well, he wants to talk.
I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
It's showtime, folks!
What are you?
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to And I Quote, the weekly show where we introduce you to creators from all over the world and we find out more about them by taking your questions. I'm your host, Ryan of And I Quote channel, and our guest on this episode is someone that we have been friends with for quite some time now. We've seen him pop up here and there across some of the conventions that I have appeared at. So please welcome best-selling writer, and apparently he's written several books on how to do different aspects and put together things of world building. Please welcome Randy Ellefson to the stage. Hello, Randy. It's good to see you. How are you? Good to see you, Randy. Can you hear me and see me? Are you able to decipher what's going on? Are you able to hear me and okay? You all right? Oh boy. I think we're having if you can't hear me or see me, Randy, you may want to jump out and jump back in. I think that's the best way to describe it. Sorry, folks. Having a little bit of, let me see. Hold on. Okay. Hold on, guys. Let me see. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties here. We're going to try to work these out as best we can. Okay. Let me see here if we can get this going. Oh, boy. Anyway, Deja Marie says hello to everybody. Good to see you, Deja Marie. Hope everything's well in your neck of the woods. There you go. Let's see if we can work this out here, folks. Sorry about that. Going to try to get this worked out as best we can as we go throughout the course of this show. By the way, if you're watching us live on the replay, we thank you so much for being with us. Do not forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends because we do appreciate it. Randy, can you hear and see me now?
I can. I'm back.
Good gracious. Man, the technical difficulty gods just love to have some fun with us this morning, aren't they? Gee willikers. But as I was telling everyone earlier, if you have any questions for this best-selling writer known as Randy Ellefson, let us know in those comments. Let us know in the chat. And if don't forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends. With that out of the way, Randy, what would you say were some of your favorite books or writers growing up?
Definitely it was TSR-based books. Boy, I'm drawing a blank on it. The DragonLance Series, that was one of the big ones. Conan the Barbarian. It was actually not the original short stories. I didn't read those until later. It was actually the ones that Robert Jordan had written. And then there was the Apprentice series. That was a great one. And then the Belgariad. I think those were probably the big four that I read. And I was kind of lucky. My brother is older than I am, and he kind of read a wider number of books, and then he would only tell me to read the really good ones. So it's kind of like everything was curated for me, and I didn't read the really bad books.
Oh, okay. Well, always helps to have a helping hand there. No question about it. What made you decide to become a writer?
You know, it was something, it's almost more it chose me, which is a bit of a cliche, but my brother, again, he's older than I am. He was playing Dungeons and Dragons with college friends of his, and the way those campaigns work, you know, it's kind of like a novel where it starts off, the characters have almost no skills. By the end of a novel, they have all these skills, and they're up against the bad guy. Well, that's the way a D&D campaign is, and they were doing like the final battle against the big bad guy, and half of the players didn't show up, and they happened to be doing it at our house. And my brother said, hey, do you want to sit in with us? Because we need someone else to, you know, we need a wizard. We don't have one. And so I did. And one thing led to another, but I basically kind of proved my ingenuity as a player right there from the start. And I remember what the story was. It was the dungeon master telling us, okay, you guys entered a room with, you know, it's like 100 feet long and there's over 100 undead. Everyone rolled initiative. And when it was my turn to go, I was looking over my spells and I had no idea what the rules were. And I said, you know, I knew we all hear that fire supposedly kills undead or does more damage. So I thought, okay, I'll cast this wall of fire spell and make it move down the hall. And he said, well, you can't do it. It's stationary. So I said, okay, well, what if my brother, he's playing a knight, so he's got a strong character. What if his character picks up my character when it's his turn? And then I cast the wall of fire. And then when it's my brother's turn again, he walks forward. Would the wall of fire move then? And everyone at the table started laughing, except for the dungeon master, who kind of went, you know, because the answer was yes, and it would work. And I ended up rolling just a huge amount of 6-sided dice, all 5s and 6s. With one spell, I killed every single one of the things that he had there to weaken our characters. And the joke after that was he was trying to kill my character for the rest of the night because I was considered so dangerous. And I took it as a compliment that he was trying to kill off my character. But, that was kind of what got me going and just playing D&D. So I was always doing this, hey, wouldn't it be funny if this happened kind of thing? Or if I did this, I was kind of living vicariously through my character, having him do things that I wouldn't necessarily do because I'm, a little more polite than I was having my character be. And I think it just started this whole thing of triggering my imagination. And at some point, I had ideas for a book trilogy, and I just started planning it with no real intention of actually writing it. I don't know about today, but when I was growing up, people made it seem like such a big deal that, ooh, you wrote a novel. So it kind of puts out this idea that that's like climbing Mount Everest. It's going to be so hard. And I thought, okay, well, I probably can't do that. But I had an idea for the first book. And let's say I knew what I wanted to do for the first 5 chapters. Didn't really know about chapter 6 and 7. Didn't really care. But chapter 8, that looked like it would be fun. I would force my way through the chapters that I wasn't sure what to do with to get to the one that I was excited about doing. And that process just kept continuing until I was about halfway through the book. At that time, I was someone who just kind of made up a lot of it as I was going along because I didn't really think I'd ever finish it. But there came a point where I got halfway through and I thought, well, obviously, if I can write the first half, I can write the second half. So apparently this isn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. And it was actually the act of writing that first book that turned me into a novelist.
Wow, that's really really fascinating stuff. Speaking of D&D, and I know this is a bit of a sidebar here, but what would you say were some of your favorite movies or TV series growing up? Did you watch the animated series D&D? Did you watch a little bit of Lord of the Rings thrown in there?
Most of the things growing up in the 80s, fantasy movies were almost always terrible. The only good ones were the 2 Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan the Barbarian ones. And even those are a little bit cheesy, but they're kind of good cheesy. So it was really slim pickings back then. It wasn't until really the 1990s when the TV show Hercules, The Legendary Journeys showed up. And then the spinoff Xena, which actually proved to be an even bigger show. Yeah. That's when you really started to see fantasy stuff that was done well. And part of what worked about those shows is they poked fun at stuff like Hercules being able to hit someone and he would go, the character would go flying halfway across the room. Of course, he was Hercules, so that made sense. But I think that, I don't know if a lot of people realize, I think that's where a lot of the Marvel comics kind of stuff, when, characters do that kind of thing, it didn't necessarily come from that, but we got used to it, seeing it on those 2 shows, because it started to be done in other TV shows as well, and then in movies, and it just became commonplace where characters can hit someone so hard that they go, flying across the room, but then they actually get up. I always thought it was kind of silly because if someone hits you that hard, they're going to crush all your ribs. You're basically dead on impact. Never mind the impact when you land. But we kind of go with it. So I thought that they were good about making fun of that kind of stuff. And so instead of laughing at it, you were laughing with them, So I would say those were the big ones. And then, of course, later, The Lord of the Rings finally came out. Finally, we had a good movie that was fantasy-based that really didn't have that much of the cheese factor going.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I understand this one is going to sound cheesy to you, but I grew up watching fantasy movies such as The Never-Ending Story. So,
right,
maybe cheesy, but still holds up 40 years later with those effects, man.
Yeah, and that's a Tom Cruise movie. I think it's one of the ones where he kind of downplays that he was in that movie.
Well, actually, you're thinking of Legend. I was referring to The Never-Ending Story, but with the flying dragon that looks like a dog. But that's Falcor, by the way. But no, I get it. I've seen the movie you're talking about with Tom Cruise. It's called Legend with Mia Sara and, of course, TC Legend, Tom Cruise himself. Yeah, that was... They tried to make it a fantasy movie, but I watched it. I'm like, it's all right, but it's like, it's a typical 1, 2, 3 formula. It doesn't really do anything for me. Right. But hey, everyone got a paycheck, including Tim Curry for that matter, playing evil. So
he's good at that.
Yeah, playing the horned creature / devil type character. But hey, Tim Curry's so good at that, he can do it whenever he wants and still make it look good. So
yeah,
nothing against that. What would you say are some of the biggest rewards about being a writer?
For me, I like the process of creating something. That's always the number one, and that's true. I'm also a musician. The same thing with that. I started off as just a guitar player, but over the years I've learned to play other instruments, and it's fun to hear the whole thing come together. When it's just the guitar part, the song sounds one way. When I add the drums, now it's kind of molded this way. So that's a little easier to explain than with novels, but it's kind of the same thing of, I have an idea and then fleshing out how that idea is going to go. in the beginning, I was the pantser, where I would just fly by the seat of my pants and make it up as I went along. That could be fun in the sense that you even don't even know where something's going. In the act of writing a sentence, you suddenly have an idea, and then you kind of go in that direction. I don't do that much of that anymore because I have found that I kind of lose control of the story sometimes, and it might go in a direction I didn't want to, and then I have to try to figure out how do I get it back. What problems did I cause for myself? Did I just create a plot hole? But I do a lot of the planning now, and for me, the fun is actually in the planning, because what that allows me to do is very good foreshadowing. That's kind of subtle because I already know. Like, there are times when I'm introducing a character and I know that character is going to die, and I know how they're going to die. One of the questions authors sometimes get is, do you feel bad when you kill one of your characters? And you're supposed to say yes, because people are attached to the character and they don't want them to die. They don't want to think their author's like, yes, I killed them. But I actually enjoy the characters who are going to die the most, because I know that they don't know. They have begun the series of actions that are going to lead to their death. And I find it sort of tragic and romantic, and it's just kind of interesting. And I kind of like putting them in these positions where they make these series of choices. And if they had done something else, they'd still be alive at the end, but they didn't. They gave into a fear or an insecurity or a desire, and it led them down the wrong path. And sometimes they get committed to that. And I just kind of like watching that and setting it up and then planning it and then having them go through those motions. And there are times when I know this is the thing. They do this right here. 4 chapters later, they're going to die in this way. That's kind of, it's interesting. It's maybe revealing of something about their character, and there's kind of a meaning in their death. So I don't really randomly kill characters. I always have some reason that I do it. But I find that those characters are my favorites usually, because I just know what's going to happen with them and that this is the end for them. And so I tend to want to make it special, that it's not just like some random death. If I'm killing a henchman, that's one thing, but those don't even get a name.
Yeah. Guy number 3, he gets killed by this.
Right.
For example, just throwing that out there. And once again, we are here with author and special guest Randy Ellefson on this episode of, and I quote, "Do not forget to like and share this with everyone you know. If you have any questions for him, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. And if you're joining us live or what is known as a replay, we specifically thank you so much for being with us." Opposite side of the fence, though, what would you say are some of the challenges about being a writer?
Finding the time. There's a running joke that authors will do anything they can to avoid writing. Now, I don't normally give in to that, but lately, actually, this last year has been especially bad for me with that, partly because I've been taking care of author business stuff. For example, I just created my own online store, and so now I can sell my books directly instead of going through Amazon, because you lose a certain amount of the percentage. I think it's 30% of an ebook. If it's bought on Amazon, they keep the 30%. It's 40% of a print book. It can be as much as a whopping 75% of an audiobook. So it's better for me to sell them direct. Jeez. But, setting up the store has been hugely time consuming. So I find once you start releasing books and you've got this author career going, there are so many things you could do as an author. And if you do all of them, you're not going to have any time to write. Some of us are better about balancing stuff. Like, maybe I could spend 10 hours writing this week and 10 hours working on my store. Personally, I'm not good at that. I tend to be really laser focused on one thing. So in this case, like even just this week and maybe this weekend, I'm trying to finish doing something for my store. And the result is it's stopping me from writing. And I know that. And fortunately, my fan list has been, so far, they haven't really complained. I'm usually telling them, okay, I know I'm not writing yet, or back to it yet, but I'm doing this thing, and it's, I got to do this for my career. But I think finding the time can sometimes be a major challenge.
Yeah, that definitely. I mean, because you know what they say, right? There's only so many hours in a day.
Right.
So, got to be do your best with the time that you're certainly given. There's no question about that. So with that being said, I do want to share something with you and for the person maybe watching or listening to this. This is an example of one of your works here, the Dragon Gate omnibus. So apparently you have a really big thing for dragons, not so much dragons, Shire. It's more like dragons. Right. So how did the Dragon Gate come about? What was it like putting this together?
So I was watching Stargate SG-1, which is one of my favorite shows. And
one.
it's funny. I watched, as we were talking about before, there used to not be a whole lot of fantasy. So it was this weird thing where I'd read fantasy, but I would watch sci-fi, because sci-fi has been way ahead of fantasy for the longest time, way back to the 60s with Star Trek, even though some of that was kind of cheesily done, but still. But I was watching Stargate SG-1 when the thought popped into my head, why isn't there a fantasy version of this? And for those who haven't seen the show, it's basically about 4 people who go through this Stargate and they end up on another world. They basically end up doing a quest. It's not really said that way, but that's basically what they're doing. There's something going on there. They get involved. They have to do this, or that, or the other thing, and then go home. Sometimes getting back to the Stargate to go home is a problem. So I just thought it would be cool if characters from Earth were going through some sort of portal to another world, but it's a fantasy kind of situation, and coming back home and then dealing with the fact that they keep going back and forth. So that was the basic idea behind the series. Then the question was, how do I come up with the overall arching plot? And the original idea was that the story would mostly just be every time they're summoned to another world, they do this quest. That's the story. When they get back to Earth, nothing's really going on. But I realized the more I worked on it, that there had to be some reason why they were summoned, like, how they get summoned. The backstory on the series is that there were 4 champions who let themselves be summoned, and those people disappeared. People keep casting the summoning spell anyway, but it's not working until it finally does, but it brings 4 people from Earth instead. So then I had to figure out, okay, well, why would 4 such powerful people allow themselves to be summoned at a moment's notice? You could be cooking dinner, making love to your honey, and next thing you know, you got summoned away. The spell that summons you changes you into your armor, or if you're the wizard, you get your robe, your staff, all your stuff. Why would 4 such powerful people allow themselves to be just yanked away from their life at any moment? So it's one of those things where I didn't realize at first that was maybe not smart. It didn't make sense. But part of what I was doing that was I needed the characters from Earth to be yanked away from their life and have no choice in doing this quest before they could come home. Because if they could just get summoned to this other world and say, hey, we're not the guys, just send us home, well, that would be a really short book. So I had to trap them. And then I was like, well, why would the original characters allow themselves to have been trapped? So what I have found is that sometimes I come up with an idea, but it has these plot holes, or it just doesn't make sense that someone would be in this situation. Trying to fix those mistakes or those plot holes causes me to think of other solutions, which sometimes also have plot holes. And then that process just kind of keeps repeating itself until I have seemingly, I hope, plugged all of the holes. And next thing I know, I've got a fairly rich backstory. So with those books, originally, nothing was really supposed to be happening on Earth, except for maybe they're gone 2 weeks and they come back and they find out they got fired because they didn't show up to their job for 2 weeks. But I realized, because of the scenario that I thought of to fix these plot holes, the real story is actually what's happening on Earth. Magic starts to work here again. Everyone thinks they have something to do with it. They're seen disappearing on camera. That's one of those little angles I hadn't thought of originally, because they just vanish anywhere and there's cameras everywhere. So of course they get caught disappearing on camera. They get famous. The media is looking for them. Magical creatures start to show up here, either from those other worlds that they go to, or the backstory. I'm trying not to give something away here, but there's a backstory. People have dealt with this before, whether authors or screenwriters, where this idea that magic used to work here. We believed in magic. We believed in monsters and, whatever, wizardry, anything like that. But, suddenly these are all gone. We don't see them today. So there's this idea that something happened and magic went away, and now today we don't have it. Sometimes authors have dealt with that scenario and played with it and tried to figure out, okay, well, how can we have magic come back? And that is something that I did with this series, partly because I realized, well, for these characters to get magically summoned from Earth, obviously magic has to work here. So why did it suddenly start working here so that this happened? This was something I hadn't thought of originally, but I realized there's a plot hole. I have to fix this. You'll have to read the series yourself to see if I actually did fix all these plot holes, but the result was a much richer story. And the analogy that I would use is a show like Supernatural or The X-Files. These often started off as Monster of the Week kind of stories. But then there was some sort of overarching storyline, like with the X-Files, the whole thing of Mulder's sister being abducted and the conspiracy of the government. That kind of took over the show eventually. The same thing happened with Supernatural. So I have that same kind of thing going on where initially it's just the story is they're on this planet, they're doing the quest. That's it. It's kind of like my monster of the week thing. But then when they get back, the other storyline that's a bigger deal that's connecting all those different quests and everything is what's happening on Earth.
Oh, okay. All right. This is fascinating stuff. And thank you for sharing that with us. And I'll also take this opportunity to say thank you to you who may be watching or listening to this episode of And I Quote with the guest of honor, mind you, the knight of the round table, the king of all, Randy Ellefson here on this episode. Do not forget to like and share this. And if you're watching us live on the replay, we thank you so much for being with us. If you have any questions for Randy, let us know in those comments. Let us know in the chat. I'm more than happy to take those as they come in respectively. But yeah, that is some fascinating stuff. And yeah, I've seen Stargate. The problem is I've done everything in reverse, right? So the only aspect of Stargate I've seen is SGU, Stargate Universe, and I watched the whole series. It's really good.
Right.
I really liked it. It's unfortunate the way that it ended, and then a lot of networks do these things these days where they have a really good property, they have a really good show, but then they cancel it after one season, if not two. So yeah, thanks, Sci-Fi, for ruining that. But, hey, I have it on DVD, so I can watch Stargate Universe anytime I want. And it's a fascinating premise and some really good character actors in these shows, too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Richard Dean Anderson, I grew up watching reruns of MacGyver, for Pete's sake. So, he goes from being MacGyver to this on SG-1. It's like, dang, this guy can, be the adventurer in the real world and then be in the sci-fi, realm over here with Stargate SG-1 and his fellow castmates, mind you, respectively. So... Yeah,
I actually met Amanda Tapping, who played, was it Samantha Carter on that show? I met her about 2 months ago at one of the conventions, and I purposely went up to her with the Dragon Gate, and I said,
"There you go.
I wanted to give you this for two reasons. First of all, I was watching your show when I thought of it, but the other reason is that when I'm writing one of the characters, I'm usually picturing her, partly because I thought of it. And she was so funny. She immediately picked up and she goes, "Oh, which one am I?" So she was kind of very endearing and sweet. That was a nice moment.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. That's actually, I'm happy that you brought that up, Randy, because that actually segues into our next question here. Have there been any other special memories for you from being at conventions, whether you're there as a vendor or there as an attendee?
Not so much. I think it's really just, at that one, I also met Greg. I forget what his last name is. He was on Heroes. Greg Gunderson, I think, maybe, or
Greg
Grunberg. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually shared an elevator ride with him. I was looking for the room where Amanda was going to be, and I couldn't find it, and I ended up in the elevator with him. He's actually very tall. I'm 6'3", and so is he. I didn't, wasn't expecting that. He's the only one who I've ever seen walk through the vendor room, or at least the only one that I recognized. Mm-hmm. And he said that he would, and sure enough, later he came through the room. It would be kind of more fun for us as vendors if more people like that come through, because I'm usually there by myself at my table, and the side effect is I usually can't get away, or when I went to go see Amanda, I had to just leave my table unattended. The guy next to me was, says like, "Oh, I'll watch your stuff," and I kept going, trying to find this time when her line was small, so I wasn't stuck out there for too long. Mm-hmm. I think one of the fun things about conventions in general, it's not so much a special moment, so much as I get the chance to pitch a book to someone in person, and I can see where it's working and where it isn't. Mm-hmm. For example, the pitch for the DragonGate series, I would say this line about the summoning spell is supposed to bring the real champions, but it's bringing these 4 people from Earth by mistake. Well, when I would say that, a lot of people go, and I'd be thinking, no, that's not the reaction I wanted. It's actually kind of a serious story for the most part. Mm-hmm. There's the light moments. So, and then after they laughed like that, everything I said, they laughed. And I'm standing there thinking, what is it about what I'm saying that is causing that reaction, which is kind of giving the wrong impression? You don't get that when someone's looking at your book page on Amazon or your own store. You have no idea what they're thinking. You can't read their face, So I changed that pitch a little bit. And instead of saying they were brought by mistake, I say they were brought instead. And you wouldn't think that's a huge change, but people stopped laughing. So it worked. So I have found it very interesting to interact with people and see how they react to what I'm saying. One of the things that people will sometimes say is that there's 4 types of people who walk past you at a convention when you're at your table. First kind of person, someone who's walked right up to you. That person you should obviously engage. There are people who are walking by, but they're kind of taking a long look as they're going, or maybe they slow down and even stop. Those people you definitely engage with. The third type of person is someone who keeps walking and they maybe look, but they don't look very long. And then the fourth person is the one who just they might as well be doing this. If you're that way, they don't look at you at all. And so those people, you just let them go. I find it interesting to observe the people who are going by and try to figure out, should I engage with this person? Should I not? And what should I say? There are times when you don't really talk to anybody for a while, especially when some of these conventions, they start on a Friday at like 2:00, which is, very few people are there at 2:00. And if they are, they're probably coming back. So the answer you get from a lot of people is, oh, I'm just doing my first pass. I'll come back later. And some do and some don't. But, I don't know why some of the cons start that early on a Friday or even on a Friday at all. This is my first year doing it, and I talked to a lot of the vendors. I think this is one of the other fun things, is talking to the other authors and even non-authors and hearing how it's going for them. Because sometimes you're standing there thinking, okay, this isn't going very well for me. And then you talk to the guy next to you and they're having the same experience, or maybe a little bit worse. There was a guy who runs a local convention, and I won't name him, but I didn't know that when I met him. His table happened to be next to mine. And I was listening to his book pitches, and he had people at his table all day. Sometimes I'm sitting there with nobody talking to me, and I'm feeling kind of jealous. He's getting all this attention. But here's the thing, though. At the end of the day, he had sold the same number of books as I had, but he had to work a lot harder for that. While he's talking his butt off, I'm just kind of sitting there chilling sometimes, because I think he was engaging with people who weren't really interested in what he was doing. One thing was he had a bowl of candy, but he was writing horror. So the little kids would come up, and he'd end up talking to the kids or the parents. I'm like, well, you're sort of bringing the wrong people to your table. And the other thing is that his books were half price compared to mine. So I actually made twice as much money as he did. So it kind of helps to talk to the other authors and see what's going on. And so sometimes, so there I am feeling bad about how that convention went. And I did lose, I think I lost like $5 on that particular one. But I was sitting there feeling bad about it until the end of the thing was over. And I realized, well, I actually did twice as much as he did in revenue. And then we sold the same number of books, but I had so much less energy I had to expend. So I thought, okay, it didn't go that badly for me. And then I ran into another guy in the parking lot and asked him, and he was like, yeah, I sold, this number. I was like, okay, it wasn't me. It was just this crowd. And that's a very valuable thing to know when you're doing these conventions. Like, am I blowing it? Or is it just this particular audience? I've done twice now. I had the same thing happen where I did a convention one weekend and then another convention the next weekend. First one was great. Second one sucked. A month later, I did a craft fair one weekend and then a craft fair the next weekend. Again, first one great. Second one sucked. And I'm saying the same thing. And so it can be just interesting from the standpoint of trying to figure out, why is this crowd not reacting to what I do? Is it the crowd? Is it the day? I have so far never cracked the code when it's not going well, but usually what I've heard from the other vendors is that if it's not going well for me, it's usually not going well for them, which at least makes you feel a little better about you're not necessarily doing a bad job of vending at one of these. It's just the crowd.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It depends on the day, how the people are feeling, because everyone has a different vibe when they're walking around a convention hall, right? So some of them are in the mood to buy books. Some of them are just in the mood to just be around the atmosphere, but not really buy anything. They just want to be a part of the experience, I suppose. And that's not a bad thing. It just depends on what convention you're at. And any vendor will tell you this. It's a lot of factors that go into this. So you just got to take it as it comes and put your best foot forward and do your best to have fun with it, of course, because I know it's not easy because we're all trying to make our money, put food on the table, provide for ourselves and our loved ones, but got to have fun once in a while because, if you don't, it's gonna weigh on you. I think to a degree. It depends on who you ask, though. This is just some of the experiences I've had because previous life I was vending at toy shows, selling off my collection and other pieces that I was trying to sell, and I really wasn't getting too many numbers. And then one show was great, then another one wasn't. So it's a weird thing, right? It's a balancing act to a certain degree. But hey, you're doing it. I've seen this man at number of conventions that I've been to, and he's, I wish you nothing but success, man. That's coming from my heart. I really mean that because every, indie author that I've met in my podcasting and my going to Comic-Cons experiences, they're some of the best and most creative people in the world. So my hat's off to you. And you were, of course, you were booth buddies with another author who's going to be on this show later. I think it's either later this year or in early 2025. SK Arrow is going to be joining us. So she's going to be on, that's going to be an interesting experience within itself. Because when I look at her book covers, I'm like, interesting. How did this happen? You got me. The curiosity cells are going on, but we'll see how that goes. I believe she's going to be scheduled for either later this year or early 2025. I think it's early 2025, respectively. But with that being said, are there any other pieces of advice you would give to aspiring writers out there?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. I think that in the early stages, make sure you're just having fun and you don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think there are a lot of little things that can go wrong. I used to I used to do a kind of swap with another author where she was reading my book as I was writing it and giving me feedback, and I was doing it for her. That started off well until she just kind of suddenly pulled the plug on me. But she still wanted me to read her book and give feedback, so I'm not sure what was going on there. But I had a couple experiences where you're kind of doing a favor for someone else and they're doing it back for you. And I eventually decided I don't really want the favor aspect of this, partly because if something like that changes. So I, at some point, started hiring people off of Upwork, a beta reader, as it's called, someone to read the finished book and tell me, it doesn't make sense the character acted this way or that. I don't ask them to look for typos. I always tell them, okay, if you see one, point it out because more eyes is better. But I think you have to find a feedback group that works for you. It's not necessarily the best thing to write it and then put it out and no one has seen it. The best author in the world is going to make some sort of mistake somewhere. Or either one of the things that I have found interesting is, let's say I've written a paragraph or, a sentence or two, and there's something wrong about that sentence. Someone often picks that up and gives me feedback, but they've misinterpreted the way I intended it to be. And so they'll say, okay, based on this, they don't say it this way, based on my misinterpretation, you should fix it by doing this. And I look at that and I go, no, that's not the solution because you misinterpreted it, but I can see why you misinterpreted it that way. So now I need to rewrite it this way to avoid that misinterpretation. I have found that kind of thing interesting because I joke we're all guilty of I know what I meant syndrome. So, we all do this where we say something or we write something and someone takes it very differently. So getting that kind of feedback is very helpful. For more experienced authors, one thing I used to do is I would hire an editor. And unfortunately, my longtime editor died. It was during COVID, but it wasn't caused by COVID. But before she died, I was starting to notice what I would call the law of diminishing returns. And what I mean is that each time I wrote a book and I gave it to her and she gave it back to me, there was less feedback. But it wasn't because she was doing a worse job of going through it. It was because I was doing a better job of not making the mistakes that she had previously pointed out to me. And, in a previous book, I was kind of preemptively avoiding those mistakes. So I was learning from the beta readers and my editor. And it got to the point where I kept thinking, okay, so she's found a way of rewriting the sentence. It's marginally better, but it's not like breaking the bank. It's not going to make me rich that the sentence is, different. So I started thinking, I can't really justify spending $500 on this, given the fact that it's not really changing anything. So I switched from hiring someone to using a tool called Pro Writing Aid, and it gives me most of what I really want. It finds repeated phrases, repeated words, sentences that start the same way. It'll find the grammar mistakes and the typos. So for me, that was better because I forget how much it costs, but let's say it costs $200. And let's say it costs $200 to hire an editor. Well, I can spend $200 on the editor every book, so it's accumulating. Or I can spend $200 on Pro Writing Aid once, and I can use it indefinitely for however many books I want. And at the time, I was realizing, it's a bit of more of a struggle to earn back my money on a book than I had anticipated. So I'm looking for ways to cut the cost. And I felt like that was a decision I could make, to not use a human editor anymore because I'm reasonably seasoned as an author. I wouldn't necessarily recommend a beginning author do that. I think it can really help to have real people looking at your manuscript. They're going to interpret it. They're going to interpret a broader array of things. But if you get to the point where you're more experienced, then this is a way you can kind of cut a corner.
I see. Wow, that is the more you know. Great piece of advice, and thank you for sharing that with us on this episode of And I Quote with the guest of honor, Randy Ellefson. Do not forget to like and share this with everyone you know. If you have any questions for him, let us know in the chat. And if you're joining us live or what is known as a replay, we thank you specifically for being with us. That is for sure. Now, You've written a number of books about the concept of world building. What was it like putting those manuals or books together, and who would benefit from reading these kinds of books that you put together?
The primary audience is either writers, or whether they're authors or screenwriters, and game designers. I've run into a lot of people at conventions who end up buying the books because they're a dungeon master and they don't want to use a pre-created setting. They want to kind of make up their own setting, or maybe they want to make up their own monster or something. Also, there are people who do world building for fun. I can't say I've done it for fun so much. I'm supposed to be doing it for books, but yeah, I mean, I've been guilty of world building for the sake of world building, but sooner or later I end up using what I've created. The process for putting those books together, it was really supposed to be one book, and I'm up to 12 now. So,
jeez, a dirty dozen, Randy, a dirty dozen. Gee whiz, man.
So the main books are the first 3, and then I turned those into podcast episodes, and that resulted in transcripts that are books 4, 5, and 6. And then I had originally just on my newsletter, I was sending tips to people. I'm still doing this if you're doing the Art of World Building newsletter, but I decided, okay, let me put this in a book for people who don't want to wait. So that's another one. I saw that there are lists of world building prompts out there, so I thought, well, I can do that. Let me go through my whole set of 3 books and think of, in this case, over 3,000 world building prompts. So that's another book. And then I saw people were doing workbooks and they were having pretty good sales. So I thought, well, I can do that. So that resulted in a fantasy edition and a sci-fi edition. And then, of course, I would take something like the first 3 books and package them as the complete Art of World Building, which was titled before I knew it was going to be 12 books instead of 3. So it's not really complete, but fortunately it does say right on there, volumes 1 through 3. And then I did the same thing with the transcripts books. These books are very well researched, partly because I work in software development and I'm used to just being kind of diligent. My degree was classical guitar. That's another area that's kind of where I learned to be diligent and thorough, because as you're sitting there learning a technique and you're playing, my classical guitar teacher would be right on me if I let a different area of my technique slip, which was easy to do if I had just focused on that technique for my right hand. And now I've got that down, but now I'm working on the technique on my left hand and I'm distracted by the effort I'm expending there. And so my right hand technique that I just learned slips a little, and she'd be like right on me. Your volume slips because of your right hand, So I learned to be diligent because of my classical guitar degree. But, for something, I tell people, even at conventions, when I wrote Creating Places, the second book, I had to tell you about plate tectonics. So I didn't want to tell you the wrong thing. So I researched that. I researched pretty much everything that's in these books and where I could. So that was very time consuming. And it was something that I had always wanted to do for myself, but I felt like I can't really justify the sheer amount of time that's going to take unless I turn it into a book series and I basically curate all this information that's out there about, for example, sovereign powers. And I put that into a chapter and I say, okay, if you're a writer, or whether you're doing fantasy or sci-fi, this is how sovereign powers work. This is how sovereignty works, how you gain it, how you lose it, how it's validated, so to speak, by other countries. So I found a lot of that to be very interesting. It sort of fit into my geek side where I enjoy reading about that kind of stuff, but I had been sort of denying letting myself do it because I knew I'd get sucked into the rabbit hole. But once I was like, okay, I'm going to turn it into a book series, it's not going to be just for me. I actually really got into it. It took longer than I intended. I've certainly done way more with it than I wanted or intended to originally, but it's my best-selling set of books. And I was able to get Ed Greenwood, who invented the Forgotten Realms for D&D, to read the first 3 books and endorse them. So did Piers Anthony. So it's been a very good thing for my author career to have that. And part of it for me was also a little bit of vanity. I had been doing world building since the 80s, and maybe I'm great at it, maybe I'm not, but I kind of wanted some kudos, I think, for what I could do as a world builder. And hopefully the fiction books that I have released or will continue to release will also do that. But it was a little bit of an ego thing to me too, to put together the best resource on how to do world building that I could think of. So they're very comprehensive and detailed.
Oh, I see. Well, that's just great stuff. I mean, honestly, there's only one way to react to that.
Yes! That's awesome!
I mean, that's phenomenal, man. It really is. So congratulations to you, by the way.
Thank you.
On all of that, because I've seen the covers for these world building things, and obviously, Dragon Gate, some of the other things. Because I actually went and I have visited your website or some of the stuff you've done recently to get ready for this interview. It's called Research, guys, and I gotta say, you got a menu of you got something, a little something for everybody in the realm of fantasy and mixing in your love of music. I mean, there was one where it was a cover that was like purple, and you got a guy playing guitar, and it's like a fantasy adventure. Right. I'm like, geez, man, like you're warping all these kind of different aspects of storytelling and putting them into one story. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is one of the more unique book covers I think I've ever seen in my life. Which, by the way, shout out to whoever designs your book covers. Who designs those, by the way? Those are really fascinating ones.
That one, that was Death Singer. I believe her name is Christina Mervold. I'm not sure how to say her last name. She's UK based artist. I had seen some of her covers on the books of some of my friends that I've met who do lit RPG. So I was like, okay, I need to find out who did that. A lot of the covers are done by Miblart. I'm not sure how to say that. It's Miblart. They're I believe they're Ukrainian, so they've got, of course, the war that they've been dealing with. That was an interesting scenario too, where someone else was actually doing the Dragon Gate covers for me, and I ran into a problem with that person where it's kind of a negative story, so I don't want to get into it too much, but it's okay. She had done really well with the first book cover, and then she was working on the second one, and I asked her to do the Talon Stormbringer book, which I have here, the Everfiend. So I don't know if you can see, but
there it is.
The character is, the characters are relatively the same size, but when she first did a draft, the bad guy in the background was really small. And at first I said, okay, that's good. But then like 2 days later, I was like, well, wait a minute, he's too small. Can we make him bigger? And she basically quit doing my book covers and kind of was very unprofessional about it and saying, oh, you're trying to get me to redo work for free. And I was like, well, if you already worked on it since then, you can just tell me that, and I'll pay you for the time. You don't have to get all ticked off or something. But she basically quit on me, and I had to scramble to find someone else to do the book series. And I actually had the first book redone. It's very similar to what she had done, but I was so upset with how that had happened that every time I saw the original cover for the Dragon Gate, it made me mad because I associated it with her, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to pay,
unfortunately,
to redo the cover. So I no longer have this association with that.
Right.
So, it can be interesting working with people. You were asking about advice for authors. I think that hiring people can be an interesting experience. Hiring a company can be pretty good, like, Miblart, because that has multiple people there. They're a business. They have, they're just kind of more professional than if you hire a freelancer. Some of those people, they're very professional, but some of them, they'll start off that way. And then suddenly they're like, well, this happened in my personal life, so I'm out. In fact, I had a similar thing happened with book formatting, where I hired someone to format the interior of my books.
Oh, sure.
I've done all the ebooks, but someone was doing the print books for me. And then there's something known as back matter, which is stuff like about the author and other books by this author.
Oh,
well,
sure.
That other books thing is something you kind of want to update it from time to time as you release more books. So I reached out to her. I was like, hey, I need you to add a few more books to the end of that. And she basically had dropped off the face of the earth. And so I'm looking at, there was no way I could update the back matter. And then I had more books in that series coming out, and she wasn't around to do them. So I'm thinking someone's going to pick up book 1 and 2, and the format's going to look one way, and then they'll pick up book 3, and it's going to look very different because someone else did it. So I kind of learned from that, and I decided, okay, I'm going to look harder into how to do these myself, because I also didn't want to have to pay someone to reformat that book just to update the back matter, So there are little lessons that I've learned, how to take care of something yourself, how to minimize how much time that takes. It's actually not that bad to format a book, the interior. There are more and more tools coming out for authors. I think that, in the last 15 years, things have changed so much for independent authors that it's pretty easy to do a lot of the stuff yourself, or to hire good people, or to get recommendations for good people. So there are definitely some good Facebook groups like 20 Books for 50K, and I recommend any author join that group. And you can pick up so much. I think there's over 80,000 people in that group now.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, it's
Oh.
one of the biggest, most successful groups. They do conventions, actually.
Oh.
They recently actually sold the conventions to another company, but they were so big that they were doing conventions in Las Vegas. And I went out to that one time and I met
Did you?
quite a few authors. Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, you're a big Facebook group when you have your own conventions.
Yeah, I would venture to say so. So you said, and what was the name of this group one more time?
20 books to 50K. So you write out the numbers 20, and no, don't write out the numbers. It's 20 and then 50s as the two digits to 20 books to 50K.
Wow.
The idea behind the name is that if you had 20 books that were selling X number of dollars,
Right.
you would, then in a year you would make 50K.
Oh, $50,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So some people do it in less, fewer books. Some people do it in more. It's a very good group. You'd see me in there eventually at some point asking a question or answering ones. And this is one of the most authoritative groups as far as really good answers, because they kind of curate every post. You can't just go in there and post something stupid because they'll deny it.
Right.
So that's one of the best resources for authors.
I was not aware of this. This is fascinating. We're learning something new every day on this program. This is the beauty of doing And I Quote every single, to the best of our ability. We do our best to do it every week. And we also got some new episodes planned for 2025, including the remainder of this year, calendar year, I should say, of 2024. So good stuff. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to have to check out this group and see what's popping, what's happening, all that kind of jazz. Because like I said before, indie authors are some of the most creative and wonderful people I've ever met in the history of conventions. They're great. I mean, I've never really had a bad experience with any indie author that me personally anyway, I have met on the convention circuit, whether it be from the far points to the shore leaves to the Galaxy Cons, or, what is it? Awesome Con is another one in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, if you're familiar with that.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see about doing that one next year.
For next year, 2025. Yeah. Well, that'd be great because I moved back to Maryland not too long ago, so I'm not far away now. So
welcome back.
If you're going to be, thank you. Yeah, I moved back here earlier in the year, back in February or March, and yeah, so it's good to be home, to see my family, of course, and to see my friends. I have a lot of connections here that have been great for me, for the podcast, for this channel, to mind you. Right. And also, there's a lot of good conventions and shows around this area, or near this area, I would say. The DMV, if you will, Delaware, Maryland, right. Virginia, Pennsylvania, and all that jazz. And I got some friends of mine in Virginia too. So plenty of conventions. So make sure you check your local listings, because there may be something near your area that you may want to go to and meet some of these indie authors, because they're great. I think they're awesome. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you for the support. It's hard vending as an author, because I started selling D&D stuff because three of my books tie into D&D stuff. So I bought a 3D printer and I started selling some of those. But those are so easy to sell. I don't really have to say anything. And so there are a lot of people vending at these where they're not selling books. And I always, in retrospect, now that I've done this about a dozen times, I think those people kind of have it easy, the same way that if I have it easy when someone comes up to my table and they're looking at the dice towers, I don't have to say anything other than, okay, I got, this style, that style. There's a couple behind me, either they want it or they don't. With books, you really got to work at it, because you got to pitch the book. You got to work on that. You got to see how it's doing. It's much harder for an indie author. So if you go to one of these conventions and you like the book that someone is pitching to you, make their day, buy it at the time. Something that we all hear when we're authors doing vending is people say, oh, I'll check it out later. Or do you have a card? And I always bite my tongue, because I want to say, I'm here to sell a book to you right here, right now, right? Because I have to cover the cost of my table at the least. I have to pay the taxes on it. I have to break even. I have to pay the cost like this. I didn't get that for free. I had to buy that myself, for wholesale. So it's definitely better if you can buy from any creative person, not just an author. I sell my CDs as well. Yeah. So it's becoming a thing now for authors to have their own store. I just did it. More and more authors are doing that. It's one of the trends. And one of the reasons is to take more control over our finances. But if you go to, let's say you like one of my books, it's much better to buy it. It's much better for me to buy it from my store, and then for you to go to Amazon. Right. And the other thing too is that I can do things that Amazon can't. Right. I can sell a bundle of books. Oh. I can give you coupons. Good. I can't do any of that with Amazon. No. The one thing I'm going to do now that I have the store, the next time I publish a book, it's first going to be available on my store only. Amazon's going to have to wait.
Yeah. Wait, forget about the Amazonian jungle another time. We want to focus on the planet Earth here and now, not so much the jungle part of it.
And I think it's also better for the readers to buy directly from the author.
I agree.
We do a lot. I'm just setting this up literally this weekend, where I send you, coupons if you buy something from me. I'm trying to give you a deal. I want to reward you for bringing the business to me, and for you to be my customer, not to, if I do an ad and I send it to Amazon, sure, you might have bought my book, but you're Amazon's customer.
Right.
That helps me a little bit less than if you're my customer.
Right.
And authors and other creative people, we want the one-on-one with you. It's part of why I love doing these conventions. I get to meet people. It's fun when someone comes up to me and is like, "Oh, I have your books." I'm like, "Yes."
Life made. Success story. That's great. No, it is. I'm not trying to make a light of this, but no, that's I'm agreeing with you 100% of the time. I had a friend of mine, and she is a sci-fi writer. Her name is Adina Mignona, and she's made appearances at Farpoint, Shore Leave, some of the other conventions in and around Maryland and DC. She does guest speaking lectures on STEM. She's a big proponent of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. More power to those who are into that field, by the way, because I was never really good at math. So please don't come at me for STEM advice. Go to adinamignona.com and you can find out more there, which we'll talk more about that as we get it later on in the show. But yeah, she and I were talking one day, and we were at a convention together. I was just there. I wasn't tabling or anything. Right. And I walked up to her. I said, "How you doing? How are things going for you?" She said, "I got this new book out and I'm really enjoying it. People are starting to respond to it. My beta readers were very helpful to me and all this other stuff." And I said to her, "That's great. I'm excited to read it." And I got a copy of the book right there on the spot, and she she signed it too. And that's one of the other beauties about buying directly from the author. You can get it autographed. You get special inscriptions on the inside, I believe so.
Yep. And
you also get little trinkets like bookmarks. And by the way, who doesn't love a bookmark?
Right.
Honestly, right? I mean, do you see where I'm going with it? It's you get this swagger, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it's better to buy directly from the author, because not only are you making their day, but you're getting some special treats in it too. And like Randy was pointing out earlier, coupons are never a bad thing, right?
Right.
So
yeah, I give away magnets to people who buy in person. When I got this 3D printer, I ran into some really cool bookmarks that you can print that are in the shape of a dragon. So like this Dragon Gate series, I've got a gold one for this book.
Really?
The second book is a blue one. The third one has a red one. So I have them sticking out of the top of the book at my table. So it looks cool. Yeah. But then people go, "Ooh, do I get the bookmarks?" I'm like, "Yes." And so I use that as a way of, trying to tell them, look, okay, for one, you get it signed, a signed book. And I'm not charging you extra here, but if you can also get this cool bookmark, and so sometimes that pushes the sale over the top because they want to come away with the bookmark.
Nothing wrong with bookmarks, ladies and gentlemen. You got to mark that place where you are in the book. Don't dog-ear those pages. For Pete's sake, you dog-eared one of them. Show a little respect for the author. As Sean Connery says in the great film known as Finding Forrester. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Finding Forrester with Sean Connery, but check out that movie. It's about a reclusive author who takes a aspiring writer under his wing. So it's a good movie, man. I'm just, throwing that out there. If you want, it's a thing about books, and we're talking about books on this episode of And I Quote with the guest of honor, no doubt, Randy Ellefson. Don't forget to like and share this with all of your closest friends. And if you're joining us live or what is known as a replay, we thank you so much for being with us and all that jazz. If you have any questions for him, let us know in the comments. Let us know in the chat. More than happy to hear from you. And we've enjoyed hearing what is known as these stories thus far. Who would you say are some of your favorite indie authors of today that you've either met or read some of their books from?
Probably the big one is Matt Dinneman. He's got a book series called Dungeon Crawler Carl. Anyone who reads Lit RPG knows about this because it's one of the big book series. It's about a guy and his cat who are kind of minding their own business when suddenly all the buildings in the world collapse and there's a stairway going down, and when he goes down, he enters a dungeon. I won't give away too much of the backstory. At some point, the cat becomes a talking cat, which is always fun. But it's a very strange set of books, very original. I met him at the convention I was talking about, the one that 20 books for 50K would put on.
Oh, yes.
And just an interesting guy. He also plays bass, and I'm also a musician, so that's always a plus. But that's one of the few series that I have read and I've really kept up with. One of the problems that I do run into, because I do books and music, and of course I've got a day job, so I sometimes struggle to find time to read a book. If I am reading a book, unfortunately, it's often a music, not either a music business or an author business kind of book. or like the last week I've been doing a course on how to improve my store.
Oh.
So sometimes the time to read is a little bit, not there. I tend to read a little bit here and there, like when I'm standing in line somewhere. So
Sure.
while I prefer the print book, I tend to read on my phone just because I'm sneaking in those moments to read. Like this morning I took my daughter to gymnastics and I did a little bit of reading while I was there, in addition to playing some games with my son on the phone. But it's always a balancing act.
That's very true. Being a parent is not an easy feat, but more power to those that do it, because it's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But I have a niece and a nephew who I love very much, and I wish them nothing but success. And they're quite good at what they're doing in school, and they like to read occasionally. So, whenever I see them, I'm going to do my best to plug some of my indie author friends. So, hey, if you're looking for a good book, I hear Dragon Gate's pretty good. Or Death Singer and all this other stuff is pretty good. You may want to check out Randy Ellefson's stuff if you're into fantasy adventure type stuff. Just throwing that out there as a nice little itty bitty little nudge or a sales pitch. Just one of those things. But I do want to let you know, and for those of you who are listening or watching to this right now, that we are indeed powered by our good friends over there at Poddex. Now, Poddex are what is known as the hottest new tool for podcasters that are looking to have more meaningful conversations or gamify their podcasts. So what you do is you simply shuffle up those cards, you ask a question, you let the content roll. You can get yours today at poddex.com. Use the promo code Ryan10. That's RYAN10. Ryan10 for 10% off your order. Poddex wants to know, Randy, what is something I would never guess about you?
I have 8 metal plates in my head.
Get out of here.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah. So It's kind of a long story, but I had inherited a problem with my jaw when I was born from my dad's side of the family. It wasn't actually causing problems, but I joke, something I had to look forward to was that in my 30s and for the rest of my life, I was supposed to have this random severe jaw pain that my father sometimes had. So there were times growing up where my dad's just like laying on his recliner holding his jaw, and he didn't like painkillers because they would, I guess, mess with his head. I don't know if they made him dizzy, but it was that kind of thing where they messed with his headspace. So he would just kind of power through it. But so I had to have this major reconstructive surgery on my jaw. So I have these 8 metal plates that are kind of like 2 like a mustache. And then inside there's 2 like that. And then over here, there's two more. One of the things that I always thought was funny, this hasn't happened in a while, but if I went to a new dentist and they did that full jaw, like they do the full head x-ray so they can see everything.
Yeah.
I could always tell when they had finally seen the x-ray because from across the room, I would hear someone say, "Wow, get a load of this. You don't see this every day." And I would just be sitting there in my chair going, 3, 2, 1. And they'd walk out. That's how long it took them to walk up to me. And they go, "Randy, what happened?" Because they would have no idea until I told them. But because you could see all these, so I don't get quite the stunned reaction anymore. And I used to joke about, setting off metal detectors when I would go through the airport, but that doesn't actually happen.
Oh, okay. All right.
But you would never guess that I have 8 metal plates in my head.
Gee willikers, man. You're right. There's something you don't hear about every day. For sure. 8. I mean, I've heard of 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3, but bloody 8. Oh my God. That's a story waiting to be told.
That was a fun recovery too. Having your jaw wired shut for 6 weeks. In fact, on that note, I was looking forward to having like a Big Mac or whatever. Well, and until the day when they removed all the wires, I found out that I could only open my mouth wide enough to stick like one fingertip in like this. Because my jaw was basically stuck like that.
Right.
It took another 6 months of doing jaw exercises to be able to open my mouth all the way. So I actually couldn't eat the Big Mac, but I was like, I was so set on doing that. And I'm at the appointment. I'm like, okay, it's 12 o'clock. My jaw is no longer wired shut. I'm going to go buy a Big Mac. And the doctor's like, and I'm like, I can't open my mouth. He's like, oh yeah, I didn't tell you that. I was like, no, I mean, come on. It's a kind of a minor thing to not tell me that I can't open my mouth very far, even without them being wired shut. But I was like, you know what? I'm committed to having a Big Mac. So I went and I bought one anyway. And I just used a knife and fork, cut that thing into a million pieces. So I ate it, but it was more like tonguing it against the roof of my mouth because I couldn't open up wide enough to even chew it. Right. But, so that was how I had to eat my food for a while. But I tell you what, after 6 weeks of liquid food, that Big Mac, even cut up to pieces like that, it was delicious.
Yeah. I'm sure it was, because in the words of the classic jingle that we all know and love, ba, 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 I'm loving it. So, it's it's one of those things. I've always been a fan of the hotcakes and hash browns over there at McDonald's. So, a little breakfast food in the morning, right? Or something like that. And, they used to sell breakfast all day, and now they went back on that not too long, some time ago. And I'm thinking to myself, why would you do that? If I want to get these things in the afternoon when I'm coming out of work, or I have a different work schedule, because my work schedule is different than a lot of people's. I work overnights at my job. So if I come out of work at, whatever time, or I want to go in beforehand at like 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon before I have to go to my job at 7, I want my hotcakes and hash browns, son.
Yeah.
But unfortunately it's not like that at McDonald's anymore. So I'm not loving it right now anyway. If you change it back, maybe I will, but for now it's, hey, go to whatever restaurant makes you happy. Poddex is curious though, what's the funniest name that you can think of for a pet?
That's a tough one. I know the first one that comes to mind is from that Dungeon Crawler Carl series. The cat is named Princess Donut.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Princess Donut.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. What is something that people think makes them look cool, but it actually makes them look absolutely ridiculous?
I want to say Crocs. I want to say Crocs, but I'm not sure if that really makes you look cool or ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just an odd choice of shoe, I guess, or footwear, I guess, is what we should be calling it. But what can I say? What is your most unusual talent?
I don't know if it's unusual, but I can organize things like nobody's business. So when I see a mess, instead of getting bothered by it, I'm almost like, ooh, so I tend to be very organized, not in an anal sort of way, but if someone else were to rearrange my pantry, I'd be very upset, because I know exactly where everything is. So I can be somewhere in the house and you call out, where's so-and-so? And I'd be like, okay, it's, third shelf, precisely 6 inches over, one row back,
Wow, that is awfully detailed. So it's kind of like pulling a detective like Monk was back in the day. Remember Monk?
Yeah, that was a good show.
Yeah, he was an obsessive compulsive detective, as one might say.
Right.
So there was a scene where he was organizing the paper clips by their colors. They were colored paper clips. I don't know if anyone remembers that little promo there, but there was a promo or a clip of that, and I thought to myself, for someone to organize all these paper clips just by their color, like, that takes a lot of patience and a lot of willpower. You understand what I'm saying?
Right, and a lot of free time, frankly.
Well, yeah, and free time is another factor that you got to throw in there for good measure. What is the silliest or dumbest way you've ever been injured?
I got a good one that's very fresh, because my son almost just did the same thing.
Really?
I tend to walk around in the dark a lot.
Oh no.
It just doesn't bother me. But maybe I shouldn't, because of what I'm about to say. But so one day I'm going to work, I'm going down the stairs, and I guess I thought there was one more step down. So my toe was pointing down like that, instead of going, on the heel, flat. And I never found out if I broke my toe or sprained it, because when I went to the doctor, they basically said it doesn't really matter which one it was, because the treatment's the same. So unless you want to spend the money on the x-ray, so I never found out if I did it. But I basically jammed. I may as well have kicked my foot into the floor with my big toe, and it hurt like hell at the time. But then on the way to work, instead of the pain going down, it's getting worse. My foot's throbbing, and I'm going, okay, something's wrong here. But that was the dumbest way that I've ever hurt myself. My son did almost the same thing recently, except it wasn't in the dark, and he was actually going up the stairs, and he slipped and he broke his toe. I was like, how do you break your toe going up the stairs? But that's an equally dumb way of injuring yourself.
Oh no. Sorry to hear about both your injury and your son's injury. That's unfortunate. I hope he's feeling better though.
Yeah, he's almost out of a little boot that he's got to wear.
Oh, the little boot thing. Yeah. I see. I see where you're coming from with that. Goodness gracious! Wow, injuries such as that.
Yeah, it's bad. You would think you're just walking. How am I going to hurt myself? But it happens.
Yeah. You mentioned something, because you playing the guitar and everything. What is one of your favorite songs to play on the guitar? Favorite pieces of music?
Of mine? Oh, gee, that's a good one. I tend to like anything that's very rhythmic. So I've got a song called Mosh Kill. It's just kind of fun to play the rhythm of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's something where if you know how to play guitar, it's kind of muted at first, and then it kind of opens up more and more, and it's just a kind of an aggressive thing that I just get into these groove rhythms sometimes, and it's just fun to do that.
All right. What's one of your favorite songs put together by another group? Another group of musicians? One of your favorite bands? What's one of your favorite rock songs?
I just started listening. Well, I've heard of them. Have you heard of Steel Panther?
No.
Yeah. This is in the 80s. There was all these euphemisms for sex, and so in lyrics they would be kind of coy. They would be coy about it. But if you were like 12, well, let's say you're like 6. It goes right over your head. But when you're like 15, you know what they're actually saying. Well, this Steel Panther is a parody band. They're basically making fun of the 80s hard rock stuff. A lot of the songs are very good, but they're not coy about it. They just come right out and say very explicit stuff, like XXX kind of song lyrics. And I started listening to them a few years ago, but I just started listening to them again in the last week, and I've been checking out some of the albums that I hadn't really listened to. And the songs are they're good, and they're also really funny. But if you're like a prim and proper woman, right, you don't want to go listen to this. I'm afraid to even tell my friends that are women, like, oh yeah, hear this song. I wouldn't be caught dead playing these for some of my women friends, because they'd be like, I'm going to slap you, even though you didn't have anything to do with this, but you played this for me. But so if you like raunchy humor and 80s style rock, I would definitely check out Steel Panther.
Fair enough. Anyway, remember the classic "Rock You Like a Hurricane" by the Scorpions? Didn't know what it meant at the time, but years later I was like, oh, I see where they're going with this. Probably not the most appropriate thing to say, but whatever.
Right.
It was the 80s. It's heavy metal. It's rock bands. They had the 80s style of clothing, the 80s style of long hair. It was very common back then. So we'll just leave it at that. I won't say anything more, because the last thing I want to do is step into something that I can't get myself out of and go down a deep rabbit hole that no one really wants to go down at this point. So with that being said, for argument's sake, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to author Randy Ellefson for being our guest on this episode of And I Quote. Randy, it's been good to have you and hear some of your background and stories about all the experiences you've had and some of the stories and books you've put out. If someone wants to know more about you or purchase a copy of one of your books, maybe even more than one, because one book is great, but 2 is better, maybe 3, where can they follow you on social media?
Yeah, so if you go to randyellefson.com, that is the best place to find out everything, because that's like the central hub. And I've got more than one site. The Art of World Building series has another site called artofworldbuilding.com. Not the artofworldbuilding.com, just artofworldbuilding.com. Those are the 2 main sites, and they'll take you to everything. I've got a fiction site that's under the Randy Ellefson one. It's called fiction.randyellefson.com. Since I do music, I've got a music.randyellefson.com. But you can access all of that from randyellefson.com. That also has my social media links. I don't do much with social media anymore. The big one that I do is on Facebook. Again, I have multiple pages there, groups there, one for the world building, one for the fiction, one for the music. So I'm not going to remember all the URLs off the top of my head, but you can access everything through the randyellefson.com site.
More phenomenal. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. I'm going to talk to you here again in just a moment. My name is Ryan of And I Quote Channel. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RyanRPM5. Follow us across all forms of social media simply at And I Quote Channel. Links to where you can follow Randy and myself are located in the description down below. Follow me. Check out the link to my link tree. All my links are there. You can follow me there. All the other projects I got coming up, and some of the other things we got coming up for you here at And I Quote Channel. By the way, we are doing our absolute best to reach 5,000 subscribers. Once we do, we're going to throw a great big live stream celebration. It's going to include returning guests. Special guests are going to come in and share some things with us, and we're going to have special giveaways that you, our incredible viewers / subscribers, are going to be eligible to win. Who knows? Maybe Randy Ellefson will come back and maybe offer a dragon bookmark or 2. We could go through the minds of warrior. Something like that. Sorry, I'm on a bit of a Lord of the Rings kick, Randy. I can't help it. Also, we got merch that's on sale right now because the seasons are changing, temperatures are changing. You're going to need something to keep you nice and comfortable during the season of fall. We have hoodies, we have T-shirts, we have other kinds of shirts, we have stickers, we have stationery, we have coffee mugs, we have all sorts of wonderful things located in our social media bios. There's also a link in my link tree to our Redbubble story, so you can check it out there. We were speaking about our good friend Adina Mignona earlier. If you're into hard sci-fi meets AI intrigue, check out her book, Lunar Logic, written by Adina Mignona. You can buy it directly from the author at adinamignona.com, or if you want to go to Amazon and some other vendors out there, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Kobo, you can visit them as well. So definitely check her out and some of the things that she's doing. And guess what? It's October, which means October's bright blue weather is a good time to read Randy Ellefson's books, maybe Adina Mignona's books, and some other indie authors out there, their books too. Speaking of which, our good friend Bobby Nash has revealed the cover for his new book, Dante's Reckoning. It's a Western/horror themed book, and this is going to be the third one in the series. It's coming out very soon. Visit him online at bobbynash.com or benbooks.com for more information on that. Goodness gracious, a Western meets the horror genre, Randy. I don't know what's scarier. This cover or the fact that you got two genres being mashed up into one giant book, or should I say series of books, because this is the third in a trilogy, mind you. But hey, you got to do what makes you feel good and do what makes you happy. So with that being said, thank you so much for being here. Support those that support you. Support all the indie authors out there. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when our videos go up or they go live. And remember, life is better when supporting indie creators from all over the world. Take a look at this.
Author Cindy Kep is writing on the edge. Books include Remnant in the Stars, The Loudest Actions, Lines of Succession, Mindstorm, Condemned Courier, the DragonLance Series, and Animal Eye. Find author Cindy Kep at CKOEPP.com today.
You've worked hard and written a great book. Now it's time to give it a great cover. If you're an indie author or small press publisher, Plasmafire Graphics is your source for affordable cover illustration and graphic design. Plasmafire Graphics, when the look of your book matters to you.
Good morning! Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.